It all started, as most of my generation's tragedies seem to, with a casual conversation that felt profound at the time. I was at a barbecue, one of those rare sunny Saturdays in late spring where the air is thick with the smell of scorched sausages and cheap beer. Mark, my friend since childhood, the kind of friend who'd seen you through scraped knees and your first heartbreak, pulled me aside. His eyes had a gleam I hadn't seen since we were kids planning to build a treehouse that would reach the moon. "Mate," he'd said, his voice a low, conspiratorial hum, "you need to get into Bitcoin. It's the future. It's digital gold." I'd laughed, of course. I was a sensible man. I had a steady job in logistics, a mortgage that was more like a ball and chain, and a 5-year plan that involved gradual promotions and maybe, just maybe, a holiday to somewhere with a beach that wasn't perpetually windswept. My idea of high-risk investment was buying a branded cereal instead of the supermarket's own. But Mark was persistent. He talked about decentralization, about breaking free from the banks, about people who'd turned a few $100 into millions. He made it sound like we were on the cusp of a revolution, and I was in danger of being left behind, a fossil in a new digital age. The seed of curiosity he planted that day began to sprout, watered by a potent cocktail of my own anxieties and the endless stream of online articles and forums I started to devour. I'd stay up late, the blue light of my phone painting my face in the dark, reading stories of ordinary people whose lives had been transformed by this strange new currency. The language was intoxicating. To the moon, hodl, diamond hands. It felt like a secret club, and I wanted in. The initial investment was small, just a few £100 that I told my wife, Sarah, was for a new set of golf clubs. The guilt was a dull ache, but it was quickly overshadowed by the thrill of watching my small stake grow. It was like a game, a digital fruit machine that only ever seemed to pay out. I'd check my phone obsessively, the little green numbers on the screen giving me a dopamine hit that my 9-to-5 job never could. Mark, of course, was my guru through all of this. He'd call me at all hours, breathless with excitement about some new altcoin or a market dip that was the perfect buying opportunity. We were in it together, two pioneers on the digital frontier, or so I thought. The first big jump in my investment came after a week of solid green candles on the charts. My initial few hundred had somehow morphed into a couple of thousand. I felt like a genius, a financial wizard who had unlocked the secrets of the universe. It was at this point that Mark started talking about leveraging my position. "You've got to think bigger, mate," he'd said, his voice buzzing with an almost manic energy. "Why make a few quid when you could be making serious money?" He explained the concept of leverage trading to me, how I could borrow money to increase my investment, amplifying my potential profits. He made it sound so simple, so logical. I was already winning, so why not win bigger? The first time I used leverage, my heart hammered against my ribs like a trapped bird. It felt reckless, dangerous, but the potential rewards were too tempting to ignore. And when the trade went my way, the rush was unlike anything I had ever experienced. The numbers on the screen weren't just numbers anymore. They were a validation of my courage, my intelligence, my willingness to take a risk. Sarah, bless her, was oblivious to my secret life as a crypto cowboy. She saw me smiling more, a little more energetic, and she put it down to a new zest for life. I let her believe it. How could I explain to her that our financial future was now tied to a volatile digital currency that neither of us truly understood? The lies started to pile up, each one a brick in the wall I was building between us. I took out a small loan, telling her it was for home improvements. I used our emergency savings, convincing myself that I would pay it back with interest before she ever noticed. I was living a double life, the sensible logistics manager by day and a high-stakes gambler by night. The stress began to take its toll. I was sleeping less, my mind constantly racing with market predictions and trading strategies. Every dip in the price of Bitcoin sent a jolt of panic through me. Every rise filled me with a temporary, heady sense of relief. I was irritable, snappy, a stranger in my own home. Sarah started to notice the change in me, the dark circles under my eyes, the way I would flinch every time my phone buzzed. She tried to talk to me to break through the wall I had built, but I pushed her away, unable to confess the truth of what I had become. The market, which had been so kind to me, started to turn. The green candles were replaced by angry red ones, each one a stab of fear in my gut. Mark, my ever-optimistic guru, assured me it was just a temporary correction. "Hodl," he'd say, his voice a little strained now. "We've got to have diamond hands." But as the value of my portfolio plummeted, my diamond hands started to feel more like hands of clay. The leveraged positions that had once been my ticket to riches were now a ticking time bomb, threatening to wipe out everything I had. The emails started to arrive, margin calls from the trading platform, demanding more money to cover my losses. I was in a hole, and the only way out, it seemed, was to dig deeper. I sold some of Sarah's grandmother's jewelry, heirlooms that she cherished, telling her they had been stolen. The guilt was a physical thing now, a lead weight in my stomach that never went away. I felt like a fraud, a liar, a thief. The man I saw in the mirror was a stranger, his eyes filled with a desperate, hunted look that I didn't recognize. The final crash came on a Tuesday morning. I woke up to a sea of red on my phone screen. My portfolio, which had once been worth a small fortune, was now worth less than my initial investment. The leveraged positions had been liquidated, wiped out in an instant. Everything was gone. The loan, the savings, the jewelry, all of it had vanished into the digital ether. I remember sitting on the edge of the bed, the phone slipping from my numb fingers, the silence of the house pressing in on me. The future that had seemed so bright and full of promise was now a black hole, a void of my own making. I had followed my friend's advice, and it had led me to the edge of bankruptcy, to the brink of losing everything that truly mattered. The silence was broken by the sound of Sarah's footsteps on the stairs, and I knew, with a sickening certainty, that the lies were over. The wall I had built was about to come crashing down, and I had no one to blame but myself. The confession was the hardest thing I've ever had to do. The words felt like shards of glass in my mouth, each one cutting deeper than the last. Sarah sat opposite me at the kitchen table, her face a mask of confusion that slowly morphed into disbelief, then hurt, then a quiet, devastating anger. I told her everything, the lies, the loans, the stolen jewelry. I showed her the empty trading account, the mocking zero where our future had once been. There were no tears, not at first. Just a cold, heavy silence that was more terrifying than any screaming match could ever be. She looked at me, really looked at me, and I saw not just a wife betrayed, but a woman who no longer recognized the man she had married. The days that followed were a blur of shame and regret. I moved into the spare room, the space between us a chasm that seemed impossible to bridge. We communicated in clipped, monosyllabic sentences, the easy intimacy we had once shared replaced by a suffocating tension. I tried to apologize, to explain, but my words were hollow, meaningless in the face of the destruction I had wrought. Mark, my so-called friend, was nowhere to be found. He didn't answer my calls, my texts, my desperate, pleading voicemails. It was as if he had vanished off the face of the earth, leaving me to face the consequences of his reckless advice alone. The anger I felt towards him was a bitter, corrosive thing, but it was overshadowed by the all-consuming hatred I felt for myself. I was a fool, a gambler, a man who had gambled away his family's security for the promise of easy money. The financial fallout was a nightmare. We had to sell the car, cancel our holiday plans, and start the slow, humiliating process of rebuilding our savings from scratch. Every canceled subscription, every frugal meal was a constant reminder of my failure. I took on extra shifts at work, the physical exhaustion a welcome distraction from the mental and emotional turmoil that raged within me. I was a ghost in my own life, going through the motions, but feeling nothing but a deep, gnawing emptiness. The stress was relentless, a constant pressure in my chest that made it hard to breathe. I had trouble sleeping, my nights filled with nightmares of crashing markets and accusatory glances. I lost weight, my appetite gone, my body a reflection of the hollowed-out man I had become. I started to have panic attacks, sudden, overwhelming waves of fear that would leave me gasping for air, my heart pounding in my chest. It was during one of these attacks, curled up on the cold floor of the spare room, that I finally hit rock bottom. I realized that I couldn't do this alone, that I needed help if I was ever going to find my way back from the brink. The first step was therapy. I found a counselor who specialized in addiction, because that's what this was, I had come to realize. A gambling addiction, dressed up in the shiny, modern clothes of cryptocurrency. The sessions were brutal, forcing me to confront the ugly truth of my actions, to peel back the layers of denial and self-deception that had allowed me to spiral so far out of control. I learned about the psychological triggers that had led me down this path, my own insecurities, my fear of being left behind, my desire for a life that was more exciting, more glamorous than the one I had. Slowly, painfully, I began to understand the man I had become, and the long, hard road I would have to walk to become the man I wanted to be. The second step was talking to Sarah, really talking to her for the first time in months. I didn't make excuses, I didn't try to downplay the severity of what I had done. I just laid my soul bare, my voice cracking with the weight of my shame and regret. I told her about the therapy, about the things I was learning about myself. I told her that I knew I had broken her trust, perhaps irreparably, but that I was willing to spend the rest of my life trying to earn it back. It wasn't a magic fix. The road to reconciliation was long and fraught with setbacks. There were days when the anger and hurt would resurface, when the chasm between us seemed as wide as ever. But there were also moments of grace, small glimmers of hope that kept me going. A shared smile, a brief touch of hands, a conversation that didn't feel like walking through a minefield. We started going to couples counseling, learning how to communicate again, how to rebuild the foundations of our marriage from the ground up. It was a slow, arduous process, like learning to walk again after a catastrophic injury. But with each tentative step, I could feel the strength returning, the hope beginning to bloom in the barren landscape of my life. I also had to deal with the wreckage of my friendship with Mark. He finally got in touch, a few months after the crash, with a sheepish, half-hearted apology. He'd lost a lot of money too, he said, but he was already back in the game, convinced that the next bull run was just around the corner. I listened to him, his voice filled with the same manic energy that had once been so infectious, and I felt nothing but a profound sense of pity. He was still trapped in the cycle, still chasing the dragon, and I knew with a certainty that chilled me to the bone that his story would not have a happy ending. I told him I couldn't be his friend anymore, that I needed to cut all ties with the world that had almost destroyed me. The conversation was brief, painful, the final severing of a bond that had once been a cornerstone of my life. But it was necessary. I had to choose my future, and that future did not include the siren song of easy money and the false prophets who preached its gospel. It was a lonely road, this path to recovery, but I was not alone. I had Sarah by my side, her quiet strength a beacon in the darkness. I had my therapist, a compassionate guide through the labyrinth of my own mind. And I had a newfound sense of purpose, a determination to build a life based on honesty, integrity, and the things that truly mattered: love, family, and the quiet satisfaction of a life well lived. The scars of my brush with bankruptcy would always be there, a reminder of the man I once was and the lessons I had learned. But they were not just scars of shame. They were also scars of survival, of resilience, of the long, hard journey back to myself. The journey back was a day-by-day, sometimes hour-by-hour battle. There were moments when the weight of my past actions felt suffocating, when the temptation to slip back into old habits whispered seductively in my ear. But I held on, clinging to the small victories, the incremental progress, the fragile hope that I was building something new, something better, on the ruins of my old life. The financial recovery was a slow, humbling process. We created a budget, a real one this time, and stuck to it with a discipline that bordered on obsessive. Every penny was accounted for, every purchase scrutinized. It was a far cry from the reckless abandon of my crypto days, but there was a strange sort of freedom in the constraints. For the first time in a long time, I felt in control of my finances, rather than the other way around. I started a side hustle, using my logistics skills to help small businesses streamline their operations. It wasn't glamorous, but it was honest work, and the extra income was a welcome relief. It also gave me a sense of purpose outside of my day job, a feeling that I was building something of my own, something tangible and real. The work I was doing in therapy was equally important. I was learning to identify the emotional triggers that had led me down the path of addiction and to develop healthier coping mechanisms. I started exercising regularly, the physical exertion a powerful antidote to the anxiety that still lingered in the corners of my mind. I took up old hobbies that I had long neglected, finding a quiet joy in the simple pleasures of reading, hiking, and spending time in nature. But the most important work I did was on my relationship with Sarah. We continued with our couple's counseling, learning to communicate with a new level of honesty and vulnerability. We talked about our fears, our dreams, our disappointments. We learned to listen to each other, to really hear what the other was saying, without judgment or defensiveness. It wasn't always easy. There were still days when the old wounds would ache, when the ghost of my betrayal would hang heavy in the air between us. But we learned to navigate these difficult moments with a newfound grace and understanding. We learned that forgiveness is not a one-time event, but a continuous process, a daily choice to let go of the past and embrace the future. One evening, about a year after the crash, Sarah and I were sitting on the sofa watching a movie. It was a simple, domestic scene, the kind of moment that I had once taken for granted, but that now felt like a precious gift. In the middle of the movie, she turned to me, her eyes soft in the dim light of the television. "I'm proud of you," she said, her voice quiet but firm. "I know how hard you've been working, and I want you to know that I see it." The words were simple, but they landed in my heart with the force of a revelation. In that moment, I felt a sense of peace, of absolution that I hadn't felt in a very long time. The journey was far from over, but I knew with a certainty that resonated in the very core of my being that we were going to be okay. A few months later, I received a letter in the mail. It was from Mark's mother. Her words were stark, devoid of emotion. Mark had taken his own life. The next bull run had never come, and he had lost everything again. The news hit me like a physical blow, knocking the air from my lungs. I thought of his manic energy, his infectious optimism, and the desperate, hollow look in his eyes the last time I had seen him. I felt a surge of grief for the friend I had lost, for the life he had thrown away. But underneath the grief, there was a chilling sense of recognition. I saw in his story a terrifying reflection of my own, a reminder of the precipice on which I had once stood. His tragedy was a stark and brutal illustration of the human cost of the crypto dream, a dream that for so many had turned into a waking nightmare. That night, I held Sarah a little tighter, my heart filled with a profound sense of gratitude for the second chance I had been given. I had been to the brink, I had looked into the abyss, and I had, by some miracle, found my way back. The road ahead was still uncertain, but I walked it with a newfound sense of clarity and purpose. I had learned that true wealth is not measured in dollars or Bitcoin, but in the love of family, the trust of friends, and the quiet satisfaction of a life lived with honesty and integrity. The scars of my past would always be a part of me, a reminder of the darkness I had faced. But they were no longer a source of shame. They were a testament to my resilience, a symbol of my journey from the brink of bankruptcy to the quiet shores of redemption. And for that, I would be forever grateful.